So we will get started. Thank you all for coming to another one of the Brown Bag Lecture Series, co-sponsored by the Department of History at UNK, as well as the Kearney Public Library. Now, today's talk is a little bit special for those of you who weren't at our June talk. We're putting on the June talk, and then this talk we're also co-sponsored by the Buffalo County Historical Society, which this summer has an exhibit called The Boys of Summer, which is a history of baseball in Buffalo County. So if you have not been to Trails and Rails, if you've not been to the Family History Center yet, I highly encourage you to come on down and see our exhibit on the history of baseball in all its multitudes. In Buffalo County, we have a lot of material that was donated and loaned to us from members of the community, and so it's a really wonderful exhibit, and I hope you all have the opportunity to come and see it. I am the organizer of the Brown Bag Lecture Series, and so it was really easy to get this month's speaker. And I thank you again for coming. We have a full schedule for next year that I will release closer to the fall, but we do have a talk on September 10th with April White, the director of the G.W. Frank Museum, who will be talking about electrification and the history of electricity in Kearney. So thank you, April. But today's talk is a little different. We're going to talk about Kearney's first movie star. And I've already talked to a couple of you, and I know there's at least 4 people in the audience who have met this star. And so I hope that more of you do have stories to share with us. But we're going to talk about London. So we all know about famous Hollywood dogs. We've got Rin Tin Tin and Lassie, Airbud, Toto, Old Yeller, and of course Scooby-Doo, which, you know, not a real dog, but still, every generation has its heroic dog who helps people in need, who defies expectations, who always finds the old man Carruthers of the abandoned amusement park, those meddling kids. But I want to make a claim that the greatest of all of these Hollywood dogs is London. Now, London is not necessarily a household name to those of us here in the United States. London is nevertheless a global icon. Depending on who you talk to and where they grew up, this is the most famous dog. Because London is a Canadian icon for, and generations of Canadian children grew up watching the exploits of London, the Littlest Hobo. And so I want to begin there, and then I want to explain why we're even talking about Canadian children's television from 50 years ago. The Littlest Hobo was a Canadian television program initially filmed in British Columbia in 1963 to 1965, and then revitalized in the late 70s from 1979 until 1985. So for a lot of baby boomers in Canada, as well as Gen X Canadians, London is their childhood. They grew up watching London on CTV. They grew up watching it in syndication. They watched it on VHS. So much so that it is such an iconic part of Canadian lore that if you go on social media, if you go on TikTok, people are recreating the theme song. There are fan forums and fan websites for London and the Littlest Hobo. It is an iconic part of Canadian lore for generations, and if you've ever seen the show, or if you are Canadian or grew up in Canada during this time period, you almost certainly know the theme song, which I'll get to. But in total, it ran for 8 seasons and 175 episodes, which is really good for a children's television show about a dog. Which the premise of the show is London is a hobo. He's the littlest hobo, and he goes from town to town every episode rescuing people and helping people in need. And that could be, somebody's lost and he finds them, but he also inevitably fights crime, takes down gamblers, takes down all sorts of, the episodes get increasingly outlandish as time goes by. And features a lot of faces that you would probably recognize. Forrest Kelly, better known as Bones, is Doc McCoy on Star Trek. Abe Vigoda of Godfather fame, and of course Canada's great contribution to culture, Leslie Nielsen, among others, who appeared on this show in some capacity and were aided by or were stopped by London in whatever nefarious deeds that they were doing. And then at the end of the episode, he inevitably hopped on a train and went somewhere else in Canada to save another group of whatever next week's adventure was going to be. So that's where I want to begin, and this is going to be stuck in your head for the rest of the day, and that is Terry Bush's classic theme song to The Littlest Hobo. So I apologize to your brains in advance. No. Hold on.
Oopsie daisy.
Yeah, tech issue. I forgot. Now it's going to be stuck in your head. And so for generations of Canadians, the thought of a German Shepherd wandering into town with a hunting rifle or a hot air balloon or floating down a river was a fairly benign experience. And gives you a sense, though, of the types of adventures that this dog would go on. And young actors really enjoyed cutting their teeth on this show. One of the more famous guest stars in the red shirt at right is Mike Myers, who we all know from Wayne's World and Saturday Night Live and Austin Powers and so on and so forth. And as a young actor, he first kind of did a guest starring role on The Littlest Hobo, and talks about how everybody made fun of him because of his thick Canadian accent. As he describes in his memoir, I had a line that said, "Wow, that's a real Frisbee hound," but said it with a Canadian accent, "Frisbee hound," and everybody made fun of him. But remembered it as kind of a formative experience in his career. So there's a lot of young actors, young Canadian actors in particular, who cut their teeth on this show. So what I really want to convey to you again is this is a vital part of Canadian pop culture. And as we all know, in our very deep understanding of Canadian pop culture, all good Canadian pop culture begins at Memorial Field. So we've almost certainly all spent time, played at Memorial Field, practiced at Memorial Field, watched a game at Memorial Field. You know, this is the center of baseball life in the city of Kearney, and has been for generations. This is a early photo. Memorial Field was created during the Great Depression, partially as a federal works project, to provide a professional baseball facility for the various teams and players throughout the community. So across its history, we've had minor league teams, we've had Legion baseball, we've had Little League baseball, university, high school, all sorts of teams have made their home and made a name for themselves at Memorial Field, which again, this is an early photo, well, about 20 years into the history of the park, but this is in the late 1950s. And so you can see it's on the northern edge of town at this time period now. We wouldn't consider it the northern edge of town. And they are just beginning to scrape the parking lot for the high school, because they haven't built Kearney High yet. Apollo Park is still scrubbed. So not a lot elsewhere. But this is where our adventure is going to take us today, to Memorial Field. So I want you all to kind of picture Memorial Field. And it begins with the Irishmen, who are, in the history of minor league baseball in Kearney, really the longest lasting of our various teams. We had the Capitalists in the 19-teens, the Kearney Yankees very, very briefly at the end of the 1950s, but really the Irishmen, whose roots go back to 1935, but they are officially known as the Irishmen beginning in 1937. And so from the late 1930s to the 40s, are kind of reorganized and reconstituted after the Second World War. For those of you who've certainly seen League of Their Own and kind of know the history of baseball during the war, not a lot of people available to play, males available to play baseball. Reconstituted in 1946 and continued until 1954. which then there is a brief interlude where the Kearney Yankees kind of supplant them. But then when the Yankees leave, the Irishmen last for just a handful of years after that. And they were a successful team. They won 4 titles, which in the Nebraska Independent League, most of the teams in the surrounding communities had teams. One of our rivals was Lexington, as we're going to see, but other communities, Superior, Grand Island, Hastings, also had teams within the Nebraska Independent League. Originally organized and managed by Mike Hollinger, eventually would be taken over by Floyd Stickney, and certainly a great many of you have heard Floyd's son talk about, Gary talk about his time as the clubhouse boy for the Kearney Irishmen and the Kearney Yankees. And if not, you've probably seen the Antiques Roadshow where he talks about the treasures that he acquired in that role and what they meant. And this is a 1949 Kearney Hub piece that has all of the players for the team. We were on average getting about 2,500 people coming to the game. So think about the early history of baseball. There's no professional baseball west of St. Louis until the Dodgers decide to leave Brooklyn. So if you wanted to see baseball, if you wanted to see high quality baseball, you're either having to go to St. Louis or you're gonna have to go down to the local park. And baseball is, Nebraskans and Americans in general in this time period are crazy for baseball. They'll listen to games on the radio, they will watch recaps in newsreels in the local theaters. Early television will also broadcast games, and then in the newspaper and other sporting press there will be accounts of the games. But there is such a desire that there is a really robust minor league infrastructure in communities like Kearney, where this is a big draw, and it is an opportunity for local players who might have some professional experience. Floyd Stickney was brought into the St. Louis Cardinals farm system early in his career, but due to the war was not able to play for the Cardinals. And you have players who have maybe a little bit of pro experience or have bounced around in other minor leagues, folks who are exceptional college or high school athletes, local kids who are just enjoying the game. So it really is a big draw in the community. And in 1953, Kearney needs a new right-handed pitcher. And there's a gentleman by the name of Chuck Eisenmann who has just been released from the San Diego Padres, who in this time are not the pro San Diego Padres. They are a minor league. They're in the Pacific Coast League team. And he is considered a good journeyman pitcher. He is of a high caliber for the minor leagues, but he is approaching, he's getting up into his 30s at this point. His arm is starting to give out. There's no Tommy John surgery in this time period. So he's not quite at the height of his career. He's a World War II veteran. He has served overseas, organized baseball as part of that effort, and is let go through a variety of circumstances that he explains in the biography of his dog, but is called in 1953 by the manager of the Kearney Irishmen, Floyd Stickney, and says, hey, we would like to offer you a $1,000 a month contract to come out to Kearney. We need a right-handed pitcher. This is a little bit about our team. This is a little bit about our community. And at this point, Chuck is entertaining the idea. He's had an offer from other teams in the California League, but he has an interesting clause. After he is let go and returns to California, he reconnects with a German Shepherd puppy that he had adopted before the season began. Let go midway through the season. The dog has grown significantly. It's a German Shepherd after all, not exactly a lap dog. And he has reconnected with this dog and discovered that this dog really enjoys baseball and that this dog is really intelligent. And has begun training this dog to play baseball, essentially. That he's out at the local park and he'll hit and the dog will retrieve. and really kind of develops this relationship with this dog named London after his time in the service. And he really, really loves this dog. So much so that the clause in his contract, which he shares with us, is that he's allowed to bring the dog to all traveling games, and he will travel in his own car so that he can bring the dog with him, and that the team will reimburse him for gas. Eventually, it'll get to the point that London goes on the team bus with them all, and really becomes part of the team. So he arrives in Kearney in 1953, and will remain a member of the Irishmen until 1955. Eventually serving as manager, serving as pitcher, and as you'll also see, doing some other activities within the community. And when he arrives with this dog, he has increased the training to London. London is a very, very talented puppy at this point. And one of the things that Chuck will say throughout his career, and he will eventually write dog training manuals and guides and things for all of his animals, is that he just talks to him like a child. There's no commands, there's no tricks, there's no treats, he just talks to the dog. And will argue that the German Shepherd has about the intelligence of an 8-year-old child. And he will train them, he will train dozens of dogs across his career, but will just train them by talking to them and teaching them words. This is a bat, this is a ball, this is a dugout, that's a pitcher, this is an Irishman, so on and so forth. And that's how this works. And the dog, when he arrives, becomes very, very quickly part of the team. He shows up at Memorial Field as any good professional baseball player does. He drives into Kearney at 4 p.m. The game is at 8. He has not physically met any of his teammates. He's never seen the field. He doesn't have a uniform, anything like that. And so he drives up and shows up at Memorial Field. And the team is understandably like a little wary of what this is, and they've certainly a bit of clubhouse gossip is the dog. And so he shows them what the dog can do. One of the things that he has trained the dog to do is to identify bats by thickness. So he will lay out bats, and he does this. He will lay out bats, and he'll say, I want my Jackie Robinson, 36-inch circumference. I want my Lou Gehrig, I want my Babe Ruth. And the dog will mouth the bats and send him the right one. And so he does that for the team, and they are astonished. Because what he does is he asks for his Jackie Robinson, which is a very thick bat, and there isn't one lying around. But one of his teammates is holding one, and so he says, London, I want my Jackie Robinson, you can take his. And so the dog walks over to one of the teammates, takes the bat out of his hand, and takes it to Chuck. And this is the start of the dog joining the team. And he becomes the clubhouse dog, full member of the team. This is an image of Chuck in his Irishman jersey after he has given up a home run. One of the interesting things about this story is that London is the best documented player for the Kearney Irishmen. In 1963, they published a biography of the dog called The Dog Who Joined the Team, and is a very, very detailed account of London's time as a member of the Irishmen. As you're also going to see, the Hub covers a lot of this, which is really helpful for historians. And again, I'm saying he joined the team. The dog joined the team. This is a photo of London wearing his baseball cap. And he would help the practices. He would retrieve gloves for people. He would bring bats to people. He would retrieve foul balls for people. He was a full-fledged member of the Kearney Irishmen, depicted here. Here's Chuck, the dog's owner. Here's London. Here's Floyd Stickney, and here's Jerry Stickney. And so, again, really, really well established member of the Kearney team. And really becomes a fixture at the games. Because one of the things that London does is London sits in the dugout. London brings bats up to people when they're at bat. He retrieves bats that the players lose control of when they're at bat. He also, and you know, the Kearney Irishmen are not an MLB club. They're working on tight margins. Under kind of the policy of the team, if you catch a foul ball or if there's a home run, you need to return it to the team. They're not made of money. You know, they need all the balls they can get. And so London begins the process of fighting with children for foul balls. This is recorded in the biography that he was able to battle it out with all of the youth for foul balls and home runs. And that he would actually, when a ball went over the fence, he would go and get it. And that there were typically, as described, there's, you know, kind of young kids, looky-loos, who didn't have the 25 cents to get into the game, who were kind of watching from up on the hill where the high school is now, and who would run after the home run balls, and they would always lose to London. So much so that it's also recorded in the biography that the team kind of stockpile of balls would increase because the Kearney Irishmen only used Wilson balls, and other teams used other brands. And suddenly, you know, London is retrieving foul balls and home runs from all of the opponents and really increasing the stores for what they have. But again, he's able to identify different types of bats just by putting his mouth around them. He is able to do all sorts of different tricks around the clubhouse, and so really becomes a fixture. It increases attendance at Kearney Irishman games. There's a lot of local press coverage, and people are really interested. Now, the Irishmen are a fairly good team, right? So, I mean, people are also coming out to see baseball, but there's also this dog, right? So people who aren't necessarily interested in baseball are coming to see the dog. And so we see a lot of local press coverage about it. And Chuck is also an avid outdoorsman. He's fishing, he's hunting, and the dogs are involved in all of this. So here we have Chuck with a lovely, what's it look like, 4.5 pound bass that he's entered in a local contest, and of course the dog's in the photo too, right? And here we have Chuck hitting pop flies and then London retrieving them. And he gets enough local celebrity, there's enough local interest in Kearney. You do what you would do in any similar case, you make him the sports editor for the Hub. And so from 1953 to 1956, because you're not playing baseball year-round, right? He needs to put kibble on the table the rest of the year, and so he is the editor for the Hub and has a column, The Doggone Truth. And he is covering all sorts of athletic competitions and really supporting a lot of the athletics in central Nebraska and in the Buffalo County area. He starts a sportsmanship award at a local basketball tournament that continues for a great many decades afterwards. He is attending a lot of sporting events, talking with a lot of different athletes who are involved in different things, and again, really becomes part of the ecosystem of the community. This isn't a player who's just kind of passing through, right? He really gets invested in Kearney. And so for as an example of this is his column here, okay, in the Kearney Hub, which this is announcing the Southwest Conference All-Stars, the first team football stars for 1954, and I do have to point out the All-Star Center is sitting in the second row. So that is my grandfather, All-Star Center for the Kearney Hub Bearcats. And so we have, again, somebody who's very involved, covering local sports, interviewing local athletes. But, you know, Chuck is just really busy. And journalism is a hard profession. So London is also writing for the Hub. And as far as I know, and I don't see anybody from the Hub here today, I think he's the only dog that's ever been on staff at the Hub. I know that's a really, that could be that's a big claim to make, but London is also considered a member of the sports writing team for the Hub as well. And so is also writing stories about how the Irishmen are doing, how local sports are doing, how everything is doing. And so obviously, he's getting a lot of attention, and he's acting as his own press manager right? He's writing a lot of copy, and London too, about himself, which brings a lot of attention, which brings us back to Memorial Field. So in 1955, there's been enough attention, you know, they're traveling around Nebraska, this dog is really, really interesting. And this is in, mind you, this is in the era of Lassie. When Lassie is on broadcast television. And so kind of the idea of a really well-trained dog is really popular, right? We're also still, Rin Tin Tin is still very much part of the cultural conversation. So like a real life Lassie, a real life Rin Tin Tin, mind you, because I don't want to break anybody's, you know, illusions about those dogs, but there's about like 6 dogs that are performing, you know, those roles, right? It's not a single dog. What? London is a single dog. London can do everything. And so in 1955, Life magazine comes to Kearney to document Chuck's dog. Now, it's an auspicious visit. They do a photo shoot the day before the game, and then the Life reporter's like, you know what, I'm gonna stay for the game. I'm gonna see this dog in action. And there's an episode during this game, which is recorded by Life magazine. It's the best documented Kearney Irishman game. I can absolutely attest to that by the amount of press coverage that it gets. That London, one of Chuck's teammates, hits a single and goes to first base, and London brings him his warm-up jacket. But in the process, accidentally takes the jacket to the opposing pitcher for Lexington. And so it gets a little confused, and so it's like, oh, no, and then Chuck's like, no, London, take it to first base. The runner on first base needs it. So he goes over and he goes and does that. And the umpire, a gentleman by the name of Ed Manley, does not like that damn dog on the field. So he gets in a fight with Chuck about that dog. This is from the front page of the Kearney Hub the next morning.
Oh boy.
That we have, there's an unidentified player, Ed Manley, Chuck Eisenmann's the one who's in his face, Leonard Wynick is the other Ron Gifford, and then Dick Neal is the catcher. And again, Chuck is the manager of the Irishman at this point, and the owner of the dog. And in the biography, London's biography gives us a little bit of what was going through his head. Is that if he knew he hit the ump, he would get fined. But that doesn't mean he can't get up in his face and start yelling at him. And so the umpire then decides that the game is forfeit.
Uh-oh.
And Chuck still starts yelling at him. And then he says, well, you're out of the game. And then Chuck explains that you can't throw him out of a game that's been forfeited. And in and amongst this fighting, there is also a very well-trained German Shepherd on the field, who is getting in a fight with the umpire. And London decides to get into the fight. And puts his paws up on the ump and starts pushing him off the field. And in this episode, as Chuck describes the episode, everybody at the park is deadly silent as this is going on. They're worried that the dog is gonna, maul the umpire. And the only thing that they can hear is the click, click, click of the Life reporter who has run down onto the field and is documenting. And you can tell, again, these photos are out of focus, they're blurry, but is documenting in real time getting thrown out. Okay. Then Chuck is thrown out of the game, and we do have a photo of him watching the rest of the game with London behind the fence. But the Lexington manager and the remaining Irishmen decide that the umpire was out of bounds in calling a forfeit and in throwing Chuck out. Everybody in the Nebraska Independent League is used to the dog at this point, right? He's just part of the team. There's, decades later, the Airbud franchise is going to bring this up, but there's no rule against a dog playing baseball, right? And so the Irishmen and the Lexington team the Plainsmen agree to continue playing the game. Even though it's been forfeit, they will continue to play the game. And people are offered their money back, a lot of people leave, but they do end up playing the game. The league president is then involved, who refuses to find Chuck. He says, no, the umpire is out of line. And so the umpire resigns. Because no one's gonna back him up on this episode. And it makes Life magazine. which I do have, later afterwards, if people wanna see it, I do have the original copy sitting up here. So July 25th, 1955, London makes Life magazine and this fight. And this brings increased attention to the dog, okay? And Chuck sees this as a moment. He's called up by other clubs to bring London to do pregame entertainment or during the 7th inning stretch. So he begins to travel kind of around the Great Plains with London to perform different kinds of shows. And so he realizes that, maybe he needs, his playing days are certainly over. His arm is not what it used to be. So he decides to leave Kearney in 1956. And the Hub gives him this wonderful send-off because apparently it's a local part of lore that Chuck has a lot of parking tickets. Decides that he's gonna go down for spring ball in January of '56. He's gonna become an umpire, which he does for about one season. But that his notorious nature for having an obscene amount of parking tickets, which then appropriately, when he's in front of the Hub saying goodbye to everybody, they ticket his car. Ironically, he stopped at the Hub office, bid farewell, and he received a farewell overtime parking ticket from the meter patrol. So I imagine if we were to go down to the police department, they might have in the basement a bunch of overdue parking tickets for Chuck. So we can only hope. But that doesn't really work out. There's more interest in the dog. And so he becomes a celebrity and kind of begins to work the television circuit. That this trained dog, who can do all sorts of things, not just baseball tricks, because Chuck just talks to the dog and tells it what to do. So he goes on Art Baker's You Ask For It. And London, and he does the same little bit here in Art Linkletter's House Party, he responds to fan mail on a typewriter. And he also writes a letter to the Los Angeles Police Department about its unjust leash laws. And so he pounds it out on the typewriter, okay? And then they have a filing cabinet that has an envelope in it, and he goes and he gets the envelope, and then the dog is able to put the letter into the envelope and then lick it and seal it and then put it in a mailbox, which is really an incredible trick, mind you. And so again, these tricks, this attention, this dog gets further interest. And so he's approached by, Chuck Eisenmann is approached by a production company that we're gonna make a series of TV movies about your dog. We see the next Lassie on the horizon. And they begin to shoot different kinds of stories where London shows up, rescues somebody in need or assists somebody in need, and that they can have a season or two of this. But then it is quickly evident that there's more of a feature opportunity in the works. And so this becomes The Littlest Hobo, the greatest children's movie of 1958 you've never heard of. Because it is, by Chuck's own admission, it is a B film. It's a children's film. The plot is a little uneven, to say the least. The quality is also a little uneven, but it was wildly popular. And it was originally created as a series, a television series. But then London was so good at what he was doing, they strung together the footage they had, shot some new footage, and made an entire film. It was released in 1958. London did all his own stunts. There's only one dog, and that's London, whereas his co-star, Fleecy here, was 8 lambs that he worked with. And Eisenmann would be just off camera directing London, kind of telling him what to do. And there are surviving interviews with folks who worked with Chuck on the television show and said it was an incredibly intense experience because he is shouting at the dog what to do, right? There's no treats involved, there's nothing else. He's just shouting at the dog to go do something, and the dog does it. So that it was kind of a very intense production, and was released with a horse film, a children's horse film called Snowfire. It's a double feature. Here's Fleecy in London, one of the Fleecies, and London. And this film is a classic, and I want to walk you through a little bit of the plot, but not give away any spoilers. Is that he shows up in town as a hobo. The littlest hobo has to arrive by a boxcar, and then is engaged in a series of Good Samaritan gestures. He sorts recycling, if you'll believe it. He helps a woman cross the street. And pivotal for the plot, he non-violently mauls a packing house worker and steals a sheep, which totally makes sense, right? The little sheep has been given to the packing house by an orphan who lives at a Catholic orphanage, and father is making the little boy give up his pet lamb. London sees this and decides that he's going to reunite the lamb with the little boy. But to do so, he has to non-violently maul the packing house worker. And then he and Fleecy are on the lam from LAPD for about 80 more minutes. And across the way, they encounter all sorts of different people who need London's help. And it's a little on the nose in some of the things. They go to a rescue mission where they're talking about lost sheep. This is the preacher and the assistant, and the hobos who are at the rescue mission don't believe that there's a lamb and a dog there. They actually fight a gang of real hobos who try to capture the lamb, and this is the gentleman, this is Chuck here, actually. He also rescues all of the other dogs that are getting rounded up from animal control. And there's a whole bunch of other exploits, and he's able eventually to successfully rehouse the lamb at the end of the film. And it is really popular, okay, and travels across the country as a double feature with Snowfire, but it is the A picture of the B picture. And importantly for us here today, why I'm even this is a actor who comes out of Kearney, but it also has a Kearney premiere. Is that he, again, this is 58, he's only been out of Kearney for 2 years at this point, so he is still really attached to the community, and so they have a premiere for the film at the Ford Theater. And London comes, and after every showing, London does tricks on the stage for everybody who's there. And everybody is really excited. They claim London as their own. Kearney's newest movie star. Okay. We haven't had that many movie stars, ever. I mean, just in general. But really, not really newest. This is like the one at this point. And people are rightly proud of London. This young dog who got discovered in Kearney for non-violently mauling an umpire has now made good. And as the Hub tells us, in Kearney, London's byline appeared in the sports column. He trots to the hoof lights at the Fort Theater. He will not be unknown to many in Kearney, and it will appear after every performance running through Saturday. And so much so that this film would be played almost annually for about another decade, either the Fort Theater or the World Theater. And London would capitalize on this. The film gets really positive reviews. It's seen as positive family fun, and so he mobilizes this into more movies. Okay, My Dog Buddy is the next one that comes out in 1960, Just Between Us in 61, and then Silent Friends in 1969. And so he's really bringing this into, and mind you too, the Canadian television show starts in 63. So he's really a dog on the make. And we see him with his co-stars in his third film, Just Between Us. And then the Canadian television program, 63 to 65. There he is with Forrest and Kelly. There's Bones. There's Abe Vigoda. And Leslie Nielsen. Now, something though, you're like, how can a dog that was in a movie in 1958 be on a television program in 1985? Well, London gets old. I'm sorry. London goes back to the farm. But one of the things that Chuck had been doing for quite some time is he'd been breeding London, even locally. So there might be German Shepherds that have lineage from London. This is an ad from the Kearney Hub in 1955, that if you want a German Shepherd puppy sired by London, to call Howard Peck over in Shelton. And so he makes money off London, and as part of his agreements with breeders is that the dog that most looks like London, he will get to keep out of the litter. And so he begins to train subsequent generations of Londons, who will all be known as London, okay, on the credits. They all have different names, kind of depending, but they all kind of engage in the same set of skills. And eventually, as London himself grows older, his children and his grandchildren will act as his stunt doubles through kind of the television and the filming process. And throughout this entire thing, Chuck never forgets Kearney. 1968, he's down at the Holiday Inn with all of his dogs, and has let the Hub know, shh, Chuck Eisenmann, former Kearney Hub staff member, is pictured with his world famous dogs. He accidentally was bumped into at the Holiday Inn. And as you're going to see, all of these newspaper clippings, because he keeps coming back, are in November. 1972, he has a performance of the world famous dogs at Kearney High, also in November. Why does he keep bringing dogs around in November? Because he's a big pheasant hunter. And this is something you probably wouldn't necessarily do today, right, for insurance purposes. You wouldn't take your main stars out with firearms into a field, but he would bring his German Shepherds back again and again and again to Kearney to go hunting and maintain his relationship with the community. So through at least the late 1970s, he is in and out of town, seeing old friends. The Hub is always covering it, and the dogs are always a draw. Okay? And that influence that he has, again, it's this unspoken influence, this unkind of recognized influence that he has, because there's another thing that he does for the Kearney community in 1954. He's the one who coined Loper. As my predecessor Phil Holmgren figured out, Hub sportswriter Chuck Eisenmann may have been the first to use the term Loper in reference to Kearney State College athletic teams in 1954, and that is backed up. The first time that Lopers appears identifying UNK's athletic teams is in 1954 when he is the sports editor. Bob Van Tyne, who replaced him as the sports editor for the Hub, continued that, but really it's Chuck is the one who came up with Lopers, which, as we all know, is something of a fairly good branding in terms of local athletics. So before I let you go to wander and hobo and do what you will, I want to invite you to another Littlest Hobo event, the Buffalo County Historical Society. We're going to be screening the movie next Wednesday at 7 p.m. It's a free screening of the movie. It is about 86 minutes of dog tricks. But it is a Kearney classic. We'll be screening the movie at 7 p.m. I will be doing a truncated version of this presentation at 6:30. So for your friends who don't know why we're screening late 1950s children's movies for free at the World Theater, please let them know. We're very, very excited to be able to bring the film kind of back to Kearney audiences who, I know that there are some of you in the audience who knew Chuck, who knew London, and probably haven't seen this movie in quite some time. Now with that, as we do have to close, I want to reintroduce you to the earbud that is